All right, gang, we're going to start with part two today of how to hire and manage only superstars part two. So in this quick episode here, about 30 minutes long, we're going to cover how to create your employee manuals, what an internship looks like for us, what the primary KPI is, and the final hiring. And actually, while I'm thinking about it, I'm just going to plug in my headset here, which I think will improve the audio for everyone as I post the video a little bit later. And we'll get underway from there. So here we go. So today we're going to talk about first creating the manuals. We're going to review the position descriptions that were provided by your team. If we covered this a little bit last week's episode, so hopefully you caught that. But I'm also going to include them here in this PowerPoint for you to kind of re-summarize how we start that process. After your position descriptions, you kind of reviewing the things that people are doing each day, we need to decide what the primary KPI is for each position. And truly, history has shown, or our experience has shown, that the more things we have people focus on, or the more things that people are deemed important, it doesn't matter whether they're working 2 hours or 20 hours a day, there won't be enough time, and they generally end up feeling very stressed, as there's always things to do. And let's face it, if you're going to work in an entrepreneurial organization, there's always going to be a portion of chaos. So we all have to be accustomed to dealing with chaos within our organizations. So helping them understand, like, what is the number one thing for their position that's important, so that when all else fails, focus on this, I've found is really the key to getting people to perform at a higher and more consistent level. So the next thing is, really, how do we establish habits from day one and have those habits repeatable? And you really can't do it without checklists. So I'm going to show you how we've created our checklists, how we use them, because truthfully, people also get annoyed by checklists. If you imagine you having to complete and submit a really long checklist every day to someone else, I think even you would find that tedious and annoying after a while, because you're going to pretty much memorize it and get used to those duties. So we're going to talk about how that factors in as well. So this is just quickly a summary. I'm going to breeze through these. We're not going to spend any real time on these slides. It's just the summary of the things that were reported to me by my staff in terms of, here's what I'm doing each day in each position. So the accountability coach, the admin person, the sales manager, and ultimately the trainer. These are the different things that they've seen themselves doing. If you notice in some of these other ones, there's all these S numbers beside them. So these are actually linked to our actual policies in our procedure manual. So from really at any point in the manual, the employee can jump to the, how do I complete this task, no matter where they are. So let's talk about the beginner and advanced checklist. With the position descriptions or the summaries that we just talked about, or I just kind of breezed through to show you there, you want to reorganize those and include all the little things that don't filter into that, such as turning on and off the lights, for what a typical day looks like for a person in any one of those positions. So we really want to cover, like, from start to finish, the minute you walk in the building to the minute you leave the building, what is every little task that you could, might, or will often be doing on a day-to-day basis in between. The second thing is once you have that really big long checklist completed, you want to filter it down into what we call the expert checklist. Experts don't need to be reminded to turn the lights on and off. They don't need to be reminded to take the garbage out. Experts just need to know or be reminded of those 5 or 6 big things that sort of branch off their KPI. So let me give you an example. Let's take the trainer as a basic level. As you'll learn, or if you haven't already from me, you will learn later in this webinar, my primary KPI or key performance indicator for a trainer is their average bootcamp attendance. So what are the things that the trainer can do to stimulate greater average bootcamp attendance? Well, putting on a kick-ass camp, making sure that it's always organized, making sure that it's always set up in advance, making sure that the room is clean, making sure that they capture gold stars and client acknowledgements that we can publish and broadcast on social media. So on that expert checklist, for example, you're probably not going to find clean the room, because that should be kind of obvious by that point, or they should be used to it. But you still might find the basic task of vacuuming, for example, because that has the biggest difference in how our clients perceive the room. Vacuuming, again, might be borderline for the expert checklist, but gold star pictures are not. So every once in a while, whether it be once a week or a couple times a week, the expectation for trainers is find a way to get a couple of gold star pictures, or find a way to create a couple of workout videos in the camps themselves. find a way to get a couple of group pictures of your camps, because these are all things that stimulate our community basis on social media that lead to the trainer having bigger average camps. But at the end of the day, how they do it doesn't totally matter to me. This is just a summary of activities that have proven to be useful. And if their KPI is good, I'm not necessarily going to judge them. But we'll get to more on that later and how the checklists work. So I'm going to try to exit out of my PowerPoint for just a second here and jump over to the Workday checklist. And hopefully you guys can all see that. So this is a sample of the beginner checklist, again, for the accountability coach, I believe it is. So it really, you can see every little detail is covered here. Arrive 15 minutes early, turn on lights in the computer, check and return text messages, 3 times a month communication with clients in Zen Planner. We use contact reports in Zen Planner to filter out all the people, and as the accountability coach contacts them, they just update the status of those people on the report. So basically, for the first 3 weeks that employee is with us and active in their position, we have this complete this checklist. They print it off, complete this checklist, sign off on it, and turn it in at the end of each day. Only for the first 3 weeks. The new employee, we feel it's totally fair to ask them to do that. Yes, it's 10, 15 minutes extra work at the end of the day to go, did I do all of these things? Did I not do these things? And it provides 2 things, a measure of accountability, as well as a framework and discussion point to see which things that maybe people don't like and don't enjoy and tend to want to avoid by the end of the day. Or even a coaching thing for people to ask questions saying, hey, you know what? I didn't totally understand the policy and I haven't really been able to do this effectively. But first and foremost, we make it very, very clear that, you know what, like you need to be open and honest on these checklists, because it really is something that our expectation is when you turn the checklist in sign, that you feel fully confident in this position and you're completing these tasks. So, and this is how we're kind of ensuring a typical level of performance. At the bottom here, you'll see an example of how we've just trimmed that down to 5 basic tasks on the expert checklist. When it comes to expert mode, all we ask from people is once a week to send an email to the manager with the copy and paste of those 5 tasks, letting them know, yes, they've been completed, if they have any questions. So essentially it goes like this. Daily for the first 3 weeks, you submit your daily checklist. And then weekly for the next 3 weeks, you'd submit your expert checklist. And then as long as your KPIs are on track and performing well, we never ask you for a checklist again. We assume that you're capable, confident, and take ownership in your position. And that's the kind of team atmosphere that we want to reinforce and develop. All right, so I'm going to jump back over to this slideshow. And we're going to talk about writing procedures. So a good friend of mine, a kind of a friend of a friend that I was introduced to, really gave me a new insight on how to write operational manuals that have become much more effective. First, create a procedure via text or video for each item in your checklist. So if we summarize the process again, we started with the position descriptions, we organized those into the typical day for that big long checklist, and now we're going to write a description for every single item on that beginner checklist. Once you have all of the procedures written for every little item that you can imagine, we're going to actually organize them into key sections, which will be based on the expert items. So if you remember from the accountability screen I just showed you, it was broken down into 5 key areas. Excuse me. So all of the items on the daily checklist, and how the manual is actually organized is based on the 5 sections of the expert items, and then all the detailed descriptions for the individual policies underneath. So this next point is really, really important also. Use 3 font sizes on your detail pages. First, you want the largest font, okay, and largest title bolded font to be basically the title of the expert section, okay? So it'll be at the top of the page, the biggest thing, and so on. And if you can fit multiple on page, it will be consistent with that large font. The middle size will be the important items that are on your beginner checklist, okay? So kind of the title captions or the summary of what that procedure is, with the smallest font being the long descriptions. So the point of this is that skimming is a common behavior these days. Nobody has enough time for anything. They're not going to read anything in detail unless they have to, and it's difficult to navigate a lot of text. It just simply won't get read or looked at all. So using these 3 title sizes that correspond to the expert, the key thing for your beginner checklist procedure, and then ultimately the description, makes it kind of a lot more favorable to skimming and a lot more likely that people are going to use the tool. So here's an example of what that could look like. See the largest font for administrative duties, one of the key sections for our administrator. and then the kind of title things for the key things. So Facebook events, Zen Planner for the registration link, as well as how to add a client to the Facebook group. These are all key things for the admin to remember on that beginner checklist, and then actually how to complete them is the smallest text underneath. So at the end of our manuals, we've sort of summarized everything. This is our huge list of procedures, all linked to the internal procedures. Some people, of course, when they get through the manual, it's kind of nice to have an index. If they're looking for one specific thing, they don't know what section it falls in, it's difficult maybe to find on the beginner checklist, they can breeze through and find it. It's also really great for my assistant who does a lot of the manual updating, because she can simply go to the index knowing that she's looking for a specific one, click through to the procedure, and then update it. So what we've done, or originally did, was we built our manuals using Google Drive so that policies that pertain to more than one employee can simply be just used as a link within each manual. And that way, when we update it, nobody has to remember or possibly miss updating it in one of 4 manuals. We just simply update it one time, and it's the same across all platforms. But I have some insight on that, and we've actually found a way that we feel might be better to do it recently, and we're working on now, but I'll share that a little bit later. Okay, so just a summary of the order of the manual, how it's built. As we talked in the beginning, start by asking your employees, what are you doing each day? Make me a list of all the tasks that you do in each day, form this into your position description, clean it up, and we use this as a summary of the key principles for success. So when we're introducing a new organization to our company, or a new person to our organization rather, we help them by giving them a sense of what are the things that need to happen for you to be successful. Right under those key principles for success, we give them the KPI explanation. There's be a lot of things that are important in your position, but none more important than this. And this is how we're going to measure and judge your performance. So when all else fails, consider what tasks directly relate to this and focus on those tasks first. Next is the beginner and advanced checklist. Just like I talked about, we organize that position description into all the things you're going to do in a day, right from turning on and off the lights to become that beginner checklist. And then we trim it down to just the biggest and most important things that would be the advanced checklist. Our goal is always to have it less than 6 items, which I think all with except one, which might be the sales and management position, we were able to accomplish that. And then finally, don't put the detailed descriptions underneath your checklist items. They need to be on separate pages because it's overwhelming, and we need to set things up to be conducive for skimming and day-to-day use. So just like we talked about in the last slide, we organize the policies under groups, the big expert checklist items being the largest points, and then follow through with the largest points from the beginner checklist with the detail underneath them using the 3 font sizes. And then finally, for us, of course, we've included that procedure summary as a bit of an index to find things. So here's how we use the manuals. Here's how you would implement them, and some of our newest considerations. We always start with our employment package, which is typically our tax forms, employee information form, and then of course contracts for trainers and things like that. This does allow us, if need be, that we can use the manuals right in the hiring process if we're completing some of that employment package early. Usually it's not until after they are fully hired. So we may expose them to sections of the manual as in part of the interviewing process, or what we'll talk about next, which will be internships. But often it's not until they're fully hired do they get full access to the manual. Once they are hired, they typically have 7 days to work through the manual on their own. This is how we've streamlined and mitigated the costs of training new employees. We either ask them to volunteer their time, which in many cases will work just fine, or give them a flat rate based on the number of hours that we think it will take them to go through the manual. And we give them 5 to 7 days to complete the beginner checklist or all items in the manual. But this time, rather than turning it in and saying they've completed the item, they're going to give us a 1 to 10 score on how confident they feel in being able to execute that procedure without any further instruction. So at the end of each workday, as I think I mentioned earlier, once they are fully hired, they'll submit the beginner checklist in the end of each workday for the first 3 weeks. And then the following 3 weeks, it just simply weekly for the expert items in a form of an email to the manager. Basically, at the end of 4 to 6 weeks is the first time we'll look at their KPIs. How are they performing compared to the last person that was in their position, or are they meeting their expectation? To summarize my KPIs, as I think I actually forgot to include a slide, I'll give it to you verbally now, and I'll add this afterwards when I upload the slide presentation, is that the primary KPI for trainers is average bootcamp attendance. We pay most attention to this on a quarterly basis, but when somebody's hired and particularly replacing somebody else, we like to look in the first few, like month after month, is their average being maintained to what the previous person was, or is it actually increasing? Those would certainly be favorable. For the admin, for example, the primary KPI for them is 60 show appointments. It's their job to manage new prospects inbound and facilitate the sales appointments for the salesperson. So we want 60 appointments to show up each month. That's their primary KPI. Everything else is secondary. For the accountability coach, the primary KPI is that we have at least one measurement or point of assessment data on file for every long-term client at least once every 30 days. My bottom number for that is I want to see 70% of people with a key metric on file or some sort of assessment data. We're presently tracking about 84%, so we're exceeding that, which is great. The secondary thing is back and forth contact with clients. So we try to do 3 times contact with every client each month, text message, Facebook message, email, or phone calls. They can't all be the same. And we just have them track on a day-by-day basis of how many contacts did you make. And then in Zen Planner, we just use a report to kind of have them summarize who was contacted very quickly. It can be done in basically a few minutes, which gives you a great point of accountability. For my salesperson and the manager, essentially the salesperson at a new facility, it's 20 closed deals per month is their main KPI. As we get to past the 3 and 6 month mark, that rises to 25 per month. That's our key metric. And then over time, I begin to review some financial information with them quarterly. And their second key metric is either improving EFT, depending on what's shared with them, or improving profitability if we're sharing the full financials with them. Not every manager I do. It really depends on the trust and how our relationship is developing. But I treat them very much like they are an unofficial partner. Just to backtrack, I guess cover the things that I have here remaining on the slide. As I mentioned earlier, the daily and weekly checklist points are really meant for accountability as well as further coaching. Truly, the most effective managing tactic is to always make sure that dialogue is easy and people feel comfortable to be open and honest about what they're great at, what they're not, what they enjoy, and what they don't. So really, that's what we hope to accomplish with these checklists and manuals and the submissions. What we're doing now is actually reorganizing the manuals into a membership site on ClickFunnels, so we can give different levels of authorization to people that need access to more than one manual. It makes it easier to restrict the information in the event that somebody leaves the company. And we're finding, of course, with Google Drive, when you're sharing across multiple companies, there are some problems that we've been running into with sharing documents, etc. We also feel that using a membership site online for our manuals will make them still pretty easy to update, as well as a better user experience for our new prospects, that we can have them work through things and follow along things, and even better actually track their process through our training materials. So let's talk about internships. So we're going to almost go a little bit backwards now. We sort of talked about how the manuals are used once people are fully hired, but at this point, let's just kind of backtrack past that first interview. So in the last webinar, we talked about using the position descriptions, and really even your KPIs and manual will help you better summarize things in your recruiting ad, which we talked about how to write more effectively last time. After the first interview, which for me is really, do I like this person? Do I feel comfortable with them? And do I think they would gel with our team? I think people can always give you the right answers or the things that you want to hear in an interview. So I like to expose them to our staff or our procedures and see how they actually perform, or what their demeanor is while performing some of the tasks that we actually want them to do. So I asked them to volunteer 10 hours of their time. Most people say yes. Some people say no. It's the no's that I always want to know why. Truly, if they just can't afford it, which some people can't, that's completely fine, and I'm happy to pay them. But I'm always a little bit reserved about people that maybe aren't willing to find a way to volunteer their time or squeeze it in to learn the skills they need to be successful in a new position. You can never afford to have somebody that isn't willing to take a little bit of ownership and realize that they may need to contribute a few minutes here and there outside of paid working hours. It's just really what we do, and it's really the basis of how our entrepreneurial companies work. So I'm going to put that to the test right away in that kind of interview hiring period. The short list of people that I've interviewed make it to the internship. So it's not practical for us to do 10 internships to hire one position. So we typically try to reduce from 3 down to 3 prospects after the initial interview. Sometimes, especially these days with 3 facilities, I'll actually have my manager meet the person first, and they'll give me a quick summary of, do they like this person? What did they notice about this person when they met with them? And then I'll do an interview with them before we get to the internship. So that first interview can sometimes, and quite often these days, is being split into 2 in that fashion. The internship includes 2 parts. We do a Kolbe A index for each person that starts an internship with us. And I've just really found this to be an important component for me of understanding what this person's behaviors are going to be in a work environment, how they're typically going to act and approach problems, and how I need to communicate with them, or how I think they'll even gel with how I like to think about things or run things. So my Kolbe score is an 8.443. If you haven't done Kolbe, that stands for 8 fact finder, 4 follow through, 4 quick start, and 3 for implementer. Fact finder is the big thing for me. As you probably have already noticed in this webinar, I'm a pretty detailed guy. I have to explain things a lot. I typically ask a lot of questions before I act, and I need to consider a lot of angles before I feel comfortable jumping in and taking action. So most trainers or people in the fitness industry, I'm typically finding to be higher fact finders, anywhere from 6+. This seems to be pretty typical for us. We need a lot of information. The follow-through score, basically when you have a low follow-through, you are somebody that really has a hard time finding priorities. When you're mid-range like I am, you can often look at what other people are doing and duplicate that very quickly, and often make improvements to it. And when you're a very high follow-through, you're typically somebody that can prioritize well, and from a scrambled list of a lot of things, select things that need to be done quickly or first, and then also really good at making sure that all the loops are closed and that things don't get missed. I'm middle of the road for making sure things get the loops get closed, which is why my assistant, for example, was selected, because she's very high follow through. She's better at that than I am. The third score, quick start, is typically, if you are a low quick start, you're typically averse to risk. You have a hard time finding shortcuts. If you're high quick start, you usually don't need a lot of information to take immediate action. And you usually look for shortcuts and are often much more comfortable with risk than somebody that's a low quick start. So my manager at my one location is a perfect example. She's very high quick start. She's often taking action before I'm done explaining, since I'm the high fact finder. And I always tease her, because sometimes I feel like I got to come behind her and clean up the mess, because she's forgotten a lot of details that I feel are important. But knowing that has really enhanced our relationship with how we communicate. And this is one of the things that I love to see in my managers, is a high quick start score, because I never have to worry about the manager taking action. I never have to worry about them creating activity around them. And because they're always looking for shortcuts, they can seem to manage and handle chaos better than most. So it's not a defining fact that the manager has to be a high quick start, but that's one of the things I've noticed amongst my managers, since not all of them are. So the considerations of their score, in summary, if they're very different than you in one area or another, this might be an area of conflict. And it's important to understand what that means in terms of your nature versus their nature, because we're all bad at making assumptions about how we expect them to act or want them to act, because they think they'll be like us, but they're not necessarily are. So it's really good if you are hiring people that have a dramatically different score than you, try to get an understanding of what those scores mean, and be able to accept and identify those things where they failed to meet your expectation because you may have assumed they'd be just like you. What are the things that I look for? Like I said, trainers are mostly high fact finders. This typically is not a bad thing at all. Higher than average follow-through scores are certainly great with trainers, because they're good at closing the loops, and typically probably a little bit better at following up with clients. So my admins and accountability coaches, I'm finding that high follow-through scores can be generally instinctively good people for those positions. And then, as I alluded to, I've really seen amongst my management core that the high quick start seems to excel. Now, just because people have high Kolbe scores, that's only one area of how their personality functions. There are 3 areas total. Kolbe is conative, the active doing, how they typically act in certain situations. Many more people familiar with DISC, which measures the emotional side of our personality, which is also an important component. I'm looking at even how to add that to my hiring process to understand a balance between the 2. You'll notice people with similar Kolbe scores can act entirely different because of how that emotional component may differ. So it's not meant to be an end all be all or tell you exactly what to do. It's just something that I've found to be very beneficial in my hiring process in considering how people may act, what their personalities may be like, and what sort of communication I need to have with them. The final piece of the internship is have them doing what they'll actually be doing. So, because I actually went through this already, so I'm going to jump right into the internship activities. So in those 10 hours that you've asked them to volunteer, have them doing what they'll actually be doing. Trainers are pretty easy. We have them shadow and co-teach. Even if they're not certified, they can run around, they can encourage people, they can support people between breaks, they can work out alongside them, they can congratulate people after workouts, and the more skilled they are, the more involved you can get them in the training and see how they can manage the chaos of that room. With admins, I have them work alongside the admin for a day. They contact people and follow up on things like expired credit cards or missed billing on our behalf. We put them in some of those situations where we can create a little bit of stress for them, but are hopefully not too dangerous for us if something goes awry. We also really like to give them some basic scripts and have them texting and calling people that are more than 60 to 90 days old. We know that that's going to be a tough sell for them to book appointments, but it's also a good indication of how well they're going to be able to handle and manage a lot of rejection, because that's something pretty important in the admin position. We'll also have them do some kind of menial tasks, the things that are not fun, cleaning and things like that may fall in the admin, because we want to see what their demeanor is like at the end of the day. Did they sell you on the idea that they love these tasks only to look drained, tired, and burnt out at the end of each day because truly they're trying to enjoy them but don't, or it was just different than they thought it would be? Accountability. Most often co-teaching again, because I think it is really discerning what their demeanor is with people and the rapport building skills. After that, we may have them, we like to arrange free seminars and actually have them teach something. It's a little hard to know, and we don't really like them to engage in clients on an emotional level until we actually fully hired them. So it's a little hard to know sometimes how organized they'll be at doing all that follow-up contact, which I guess is where it's nice to see that high follow-through score in Colby, because it's at least a somewhat reassuring feeling that they might excel at something like that. With the sales manager, I find this one is the easiest one for me, but I have them watch all my sales videos, or you could use Bedros' product Close Clients, which is excellent. And basically, I give them 7 days to do that with no further instruction. And then it's the second interview. They have to sell me a program just like I was a client. And I like to see how well not only did they retain the information, excuse me, though that's not the big factor for me. It's more a matter of what was the effort I could tell that they put in to try to learn this stuff, to be able to apply it when they're going to be nervous and uncomfortable. So, for example, I had an interview with somebody who had great previous sales experience, and I thought they were going to be amazing for the position. And then when she showed up next week, it was clear that she really was struggling with the language or things that were illustrated in the videos. And a little questioning identified that she really put off watching the videos until the last 2 or 3 days and didn't even get through them all. So that's obviously not the behavior I was looking for somebody in that position, and it ultimately ended up disqualifying her. Finally, in terms of the management role, I find it hard to pick a good manager. That quick start is very telling for me, what their personality is like. But ultimately, because these people work the closest with me, my final decision is often based on what's my trust and comfort with them. How do I feel that we can manage our relationship to have them be open and honest with me so I can guide them and sometimes criticize them. And even that sometimes I don't articulate myself well, so I can't have them be easily offended by something I might say. So it really is, how well do I like them, or how long do I get along with them? The second or final interview is often pretty short. Most things have been covered, as you can tell, through the internship process at this point. It often fills in the gaps, maybe asks a few behavioral questions. If we have any kind of areas that we're not sure, we'll detail compensation, make sure and reaffirm that's all going to work, and confirm availability. Some testing of their knowledge or skills they may have acquired in the internship, just to make sure they are committed to the position. Probably one of the biggest questions I like to ask is, if I call you with only an hour's notice 10 times, how many times do you say, yes, I can be available? And I expect to hold them to that, just simply because we have certainly found that we end up with a lot of moms and stuff with kids, which is completely fine. And I love supporting families, but they sometimes overestimate, or perhaps our perception of what their availability is versus what is actual is different. And no fault to them. It's not a reason to disqualify them, but I think it's really important to be clear on that, because both people end up pretty stressed in situations where those perceptions are different, and it usually leads to a failure in the position. I have Actually, one recent failure that I'm probably dealing with right now, and it's unfortunate because I was having such a great track record with this, but it did appear we mishired in the sense of that perception of availability. So I think that's why that's such an important thing. End of internship, the key staff they worked with will always rate them on a 1 to 10 scale, and typically on these three things. Number one, how much do you like them and feel comfortable with them? Number two, can or will you trust them to take over your clients? I always talk to my team in an ownership manner, in that I expect them to take ownership and guard our clients' lives. They're their clients. They built trust with them. Do we feel comfortable with this person stepping in and taking over tomorrow? Why or why not? How do you rate their skills compared to your own? And I think this is a really important thing, because you always want to hire people that are as good or better than the person that they may be working with, replacing, or the position that they might be filling in a new facility. I want them to be as good or better than my other staff. And better is awesome, because usually it takes your current staff member who may become comfortable and complacent in their position and lights that fire under them that says, you know what, there's that competitive nature, and I want to be as good or better than the person I'm suggesting we hire. Don't be afraid to question that also, because we know that people can be easily offended. So the current staff member may sometimes underestimate them because they're nervous about what they think that person's skills are possibly better than their own. But I really believe, especially within our organization, we have such good relationships that most of us would be pretty comfortable to identify that. So that really hasn't been a concern for me, but I think worth mentioning. Once hired, now they really spend and get intimate with those manuals. We have them work through every single process. It's a long, drawn out, kind of boring week for them, no doubt. We have them work alongside current team members. Typically, I want them to work alongside a current team member for 1 week full time if possible, or 2 to 3 weeks part time if they're leaving another position. Essentially, like 30 to 40 hours working with somebody senior to you. Yes, this is where my cost goes, but at this point, I feel like we filter people pretty well. And it's really about having them hitting the ground running, feeling confident. And I was given something by a strategic coach recently, which I love, which is we're initiating a no rescue policy. So once you're done this training period, essentially, if it isn't going to cost the company much money or no money for you to make a mistake, we won't save you. If you don't know the answer, you got to find it and figure it out on your own. We're not going to spoon feed you. New locations, I like to hire quite far in advance, like 4 to 6 weeks in advance, in order to facilitate a lot of time for them to grow confident, so that they are going to be able to survive on their own without me ever having to step foot in the facility. So just kind of as we wrap up here, I want to share with you some recent failures and new learning. It's new to us, and we're just implementing the end of the training with the manuals, that they have to submit the beginner checklist with a 1 to 10 score by each, saying, this is how confident I feel about every item on the checklist. We found that we were simply asking to submit a checklist saying that they reviewed each policy and knew what it was, but a quick check mark wasn't enough for them to take ownership. And as such, people find shortcuts. They breeze through it. They don't take it seriously. They check it off. Yes, I know this, only to find out on opening day that they don't, which means a lot of phone calls and a lot of stress for everyone. When opening a new market, I'm actually going to pay to have them travel and stay for 5 business days in one of the other markets where my facilities are, so they can truly work alongside that team. Obviously, in a new market with 1 location, they can't work alongside anyone there. I thought we could get away with just 1 or 2 days of them traveling up and spending a few hours with my team for new locations. But within the most recent one, I'd say this turned out to be more than like kind of a 50 to 60%. They knew what they needed to do and how to do things, as opposed to the 70 to 80% that we're aiming for. So it wasn't disastrous, but I really believe the investment will be worth it. Even though it will cost a few $100s per employee, I believe that we'll have a much better outcome, especially with our clients in a brand new opening in a new market, to have the clients have a better experience on day one. We built the manuals in Google Drive for easy updating, as I explained. We're now, like I said, we're going to move this to ClickFunnels to create a platform that I think will be a better user platform for the person going through the process, as well as give us a more behind the scenes look of how they're navigating through it and how effectively they're able to do so. So there's some things within that membership environment that I just think it will create a better overall experience, as well as making it easier to share and keep it organized. And the great news is that I also think that can really help you guys, because it would make it better and easier for me to share those resources with coaching clients, as well as make them available for purchase for fitness pros worldwide that are struggling in this area and trying to find ways to better run and manage their facilities. So in a nutshell, guys, that's my summary this morning. I hope that you find that information useful, particularly alongside part one from last week, also posted in the group with the PowerPoint presentation and on my YouTube channel. So I'm going to stop the recording now, and if we have a few questions, I'll certainly make some time for questions here.